Hello, I'm Amanda and I'm complicated. I'm 58. I have one gorgeous son and three beautiful stepkids. I'm happily married and I live in the northern suburbs of Adelaide in South Australia. When I was very young and living in Angaston with my siblings and my parents, my father had been to jail. My mother wasn't very well educated. There was trouble. My parents' marriage was a typical shotgun wedding. My grandfather did actually produce the shotgun, so I found out. Forced my father to break off his relationship with his current person because he'd gotten my mother pregnant. He was, I believe, quite unhappy. My brother was born, and 18 months later, my sister was born. 4 years later, I was born, and 18 months later, my younger brother was born. And it wasn't a happy existence. My father had been to jail. I'm not sure what went on with my mother. I've heard reports that she didn't deal with being a parent terribly well, consequently didn't look after us that well. My aunt remembers us constantly being dirty. I don't know, parenting's a pretty hard job if you ask me. I believe my mother had met somebody and decided that she was going to leave my dad and leave us kids and go and have a good life. She told me years ago that she organised for us to go into the Morialta Protestant Children's Home. And one day, Dad took us all out for a drive. And when we came home after what felt like hours, the house was empty. There was no bedding, no cutlery. There was only a few pieces of furniture. My father rang his sister, my aunt, and they came over. I don't recall what happened, but I know that on the 12th of January 1970, I went into the home and my life changed forever. My father was very distraught. He then became a raging alcoholic. He still managed to keep a job down at the fruit packing shed in Angaston, Angus Park, it's called then. We saw him occasionally, but it was probably very upsetting for him. I only recall seeing my mother maybe twice when we were in the home. It was a terrible existence living in Morialta. I was mentally, physically and sexually taken advantage of and abused. The house parents, house mothers that we used to call them, were, I found out later on, only quite young themselves. My sister recalls them of being dark-skinned or Aboriginal. And they were the ones who did the terrible jobs of, I believe, all the dishes and stuff, and the laundry, all the terrible jobs, which, any wonder they weren't nasty. And there was a blanket room where all the blankets were kept between where they housed the boys and the girls. We were in separate wings of Morialta, and the boys took great delight in segregating the weakling girls. I don't know what to call it, and forcing them into the blanket cupboard and scaring them, trying to perform sexual acts on them. I was one of them. And, this wasn't just a 1 or 2 or 3 time thing. This was a regular occurrence. And if the house mothers didn't like you, they would get a metal spatula, wet it and slap you on the leg with it. If they saw you being naughty or you did something that was considered naughty. It was just horrendous. There was a girl who was older than me who forced me into a room and attempted to make me give her fellatio, which was, or whatever you call it. Anyway, I was either 6 or 7. It was when wasn't when I was just new, but it wasn't when I'd been there for a long time either. So it was, can you imagine? I think back on that, and it's no wonder I was so terribly traumatized. And it was terrible. It was such a. I remember not being able to breathe. I remember that feeling of being so frightened of, number one, doing what she wanted me to do. Number two, what was going to happen to me. I know that I got out of there quick smart. I do not know whether I did anything or not. I have no idea. I don't recall it. I was extremely frightened. And I'm not sure whether it was, I think it was after that, the man who ran the home at that time, his son Stanley, took me down to the laundry room, which was, the place had 3 stories. Oh, well, had 2 stories in an attic, and it had like a bit of a cold storage downstairs. And there was also this massive laundry room, and it had several parts to it. So you would walk into the laundry and you would see dryers and washers set up, and then you would walk around this area, like further back, that was kind of, wasn't separate, but it felt separate to the whole area. And he took me in there and he lifted me up face to face, and he forced his finger into me, breaking my hymen, and I remember the pain. The pain was terrible. And I must have bled into my pants. Well, I did bleed into my pants, and several weeks later, after I'd been to bed, the house mothers got me up and they pushed me from one to the other, and were telling me that I'd shit my pants, was the statement. And they were giggling and laughing and being forceful with me, actually pushing me from one to the other. I remember that there were glasses on the table of what looked like wee, but I know now it was probably hot or some kind of white wine. So they'd obviously been drinking. I quizzed my sister on how old these girls might have been. She has a much better memory of it than me. And she says that she believes one of them was as young as 15, and what the other 2 were 17, I think. So yeah, that was terrible. And they used to have these days. I don't know whether it was, I think it was a Saturday, because Sunday we all had to go to church. And was like an open day, and they opened the place up, and everything became all nice and airy fairy, and all these people would come. There were cars everywhere, and men who would come and check out the kids, and parents who would. They had this lawn area out the front, and it, they would bring out this bench style seating, and prospective parents, foster parents, holiday parents would sit around on this seating, and they would trot us out to go and say hello to each of the parents. And I remember being told once, "Oh, it's amazing you turned out as good as you have." I think I was 7. That's what a stupid thing to say to a kid. Anyway, it was just, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I remember there was a fire. That was extremely scary. The fire was a bushfire, and they were preparing. We had to meet in the hall. They were preparing us to survive the fire. And there was a dam on the property, and so they grabbed these sheets and tore them up into triangles, showed us how to put them over our face so that we didn't choke. But what they did to terrorise us told us that if the fire got too close, we were going to have to go down to the dam and get into the dam. I couldn't swim. Get into the dam and duck down when the flames come over, and hold our breath for as long as we could. Can you imagine telling a 7-year-old that? Oh, what year was that? That would have been 72, I think, 1972. You know, I remember that, and I remember the thick smoke. I remember just the whole thing being extremely overwhelming. Everything was overwhelming. Everything. Going to school was overwhelming. Dealing with the house mothers was overwhelming. Being bullied by the boys, it's always the boys, was terrible. It was just terrible. No one was accountable for anything, and they got away with treating us like dirt. You know, I think about how outspoken I am now to how mute I was for such a long time. I know that I had tried to tell someone about further abuse that I received after I left Morialta, and that was a mistake, because that just brought more sadness and pain to my life than to anyone else's. So, yeah, you couldn't really tell anyone, and couldn't tell your parents. I couldn't tell my sister. My both my brothers had been fostered out. Who's going to believe a little kid in the early 70s in that situation? Nobody's going to, in that era, believe an orphan. That's basically what I was. I didn't know it then, and I consequently didn't know it until I was in my early 40s. But I was the responsibility of the state. I didn't know that. Even though they made my father pay money for being in there, actually do not know what the date was that they signed the responsibility for me. I'm not in Summit Primary School. There was a very nice teacher there. She was very good to me. I know that I received some testing that other students didn't get. I was taken into a room off of the principal's room, and this person came in with water in jugs and asked me about, and it was coloured water, and asked me about whether there was still the same amount of water from an 8-ounce jug poured into a differently shaped 8-ounce jug or 2 4-ounce jugs. I arrived at Morialta on the 12th of January 1971, 4 days before my birthday. That's, I've always remembered the date. And I left with my sister. We were the last 2 people at Morialta to leave. 9, I think. 8 or 9. 8. I think I was 8. Anyway, Dad came, drunk, picked us up in his VW Beetle, drove us back to Anguston, and I was extremely happy. My sister was not. She did not have the same experience as me. And in the middle of the night, one night, my aunt and my younger brother's foster mother came and got us out of bed and took us away. Now, I know that it was about 10 o'clock at night because I had a conversation, an adult conversation with both of those women, and they felt that they were doing the right thing. My sister had called my aunt, very distressed. My aunt had called Janice, who's now passed away, and they made a decision to come and take us away, wake us up. I think it was about a year, maybe not quite. It was the best time of my life for me. It was exactly where I wanted to be. I knew that I was with somebody who loved me. I was with my sister. My sister, she didn't have as good an experience living with Dad as what I did. I loved my sister, loved my dad. He said to me once, "Do you want to see your mum?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Go and look in the mirror." I was so disappointed. However, years later, when I did meet her, I totally understood what he meant because we look very similar. Now that I'm older and carrying a bit more weight, even more so. So, yeah, I understood what he meant. Well, my sister went back to my aunt's and I went to live with my younger brother. I wasn't too unhappy about that because, once again, I loved my younger brother. I wanted to see him. But I also wanted to see my older brother. I wanted to see my sister. I wanted to see my mother. I was traumatised. I was extremely traumatised. I'd been sexually abused by several different people, men and a woman, a girl, child. And, I couldn't figure anything out. My brain was working overtime just to survive. Janice and John, both of them are deceased, were my younger brother's foster parents. And they would have only been 19 or 20, maybe 21 or 22. Weren't older than that. Janice used to work at Lazy Lamb at O'Halloran Hill. Anyway, and John was an air traffic controller. And life wasn't too bad, but I hadn't really the budget for another child, and food was a bit on the scarce side. So was love. But I was with my brother, so, I put up with it. Anyway, I was fairly troubled, so they decided to find another family for me through the church. So they put me up with this family in Brighton. They had 2 sons, and I went for a trial weekend. I didn't want to go there. It was terrible. Even on the trial weekend, it was bad. But I went there anyway because, I was unwanted. I was damaged goods. I was fully damaged goods. And when I got there, they did the room purple. What kid likes purple? I don't know, but this kid didn't. Funnily enough, I happen to quite like purple now. But the foster father decided that I would be his sexual toy. And it began one night when I had a stomachache. Foster mother was a matron or something or other in a nursing home or an old folks home, and she only worked nights. And the father was a mechanic, and he stunk. He had bad body odour. And the kids didn't much like me. Both the sons didn't much like me. The eldest son encouraged me to run away, which I eventually did. But this one night when I had a stomachache, the foster father encouraged me to come to bed with him, and he cuddled me, and that was the first time that he had sex with me. And it wasn't really sex. I was frozen. I mean, I didn't resist. I didn't say no. But let's get to the point. I was 9 years old. 9. And that was basically because of how frozen I was, that was his green light to say, oh, yeah, I can do that again. Only it wasn't that I had to go to his room, because I never even went in there again. I was too scared to even go in there. He used to come to my room, and I would always sleep with my back to the door and with my mouth clammed shut, because he tried to stick it in my mouth on more than one occasions. But what he would do is he would climb in the bed next to me, and his stick was always wet, and he would shove it between my legs, and he would hold my hips down on the bed so I couldn't struggle. And that would be what he did every couple of nights for the entire time that I was there. And I had made friends with the people across the road. I went to school with them at Brighton Primary. And I had told Marianne, and she went straight and told her mum. Now, this is the first time that I had been brave enough to say anything to anyone. And she went straight and told an adult. Jill called us into the house. We talked a bit, and she said, look, I think it's best if you go home. I'm going to have a word to John. So I went home, which was across the road, sat in my bedroom, and then I heard the knock at the door, and she confronted him about it. And they fought. Like, I stood back. He didn't know that I was there, but I stood back. Jill knew that I was there listening, and she stuck up for me. the only person in my entire life at that stage, 9 or 10, by the time I'd told her, was fighting and the door shut and I wasn't allowed to go back over there. Anyway, he made me a hot dog, made me an omelette. He made me an omelette and had salt in it. And for years and years, I couldn't eat a hot dog and I could not eat an omelette. I could eat eggs, but I couldn't eat an omelette for very many years. In fact, I think I was about 30 when I had an omelette for the first time and realised how delicious they could be. It took them quite a long time, a whole school term, to get me out of that place. But in the meantime, what they did was they took me to Department of Community Welfare, and the foster mother and I went and had an interview with that person in a room with all three. I think there were four of us, three or four of us. But who's going to speak in front of the person who's been abusing you, or been a party to it? I used to cry a lot, and she took photos of me crying at the table, and she would shove them at me at the dinner table and say, "Who can put up with this?" And say all of these things. It was terrible. It's heartbreaking, soul destroying. Eventually got out of there and went to live in a cottage home in Plimpton with some very decent cottage parents and quite a few other kids. Everyone was just as messed up as me, though. However, there was no abuse there. Life was tough. There was no abuse. And it was one night. This is quite funny. One night, because remember I'd been living in the country and then I went to live for a short time in Clinton Park and then to Brighton, and it was quite a insular type of living. Then I went to the cottage home and I woke up in the middle of the night one night and I was so frightened. I thought I had been visited by a UFO because there was this thing in the street with lights out the front, whirring lights up the top. It was a street sweeper. And for many years, I think till I was about 26 or 27, when I saw a street sweeper at night myself, that I realised. So that was another trauma, just a silly trauma, but, just another thing. And I couldn't talk about, who was I going to talk to about it? That the cottage parents saw that I was traumatised. They organised for me to have some counselling, and I went into town and had some counselling with some bloke who taught me about meditation. I didn't actually realise that that's what he was doing, but that's what he did. I also used to see at the Catholic Family Welfare Bureau, I used to see a lady who's, I won't use her name, it's quite well known, and she used to counsel me, but I couldn't say anything to her because what is, a 10-year-old, 11-year-old going to say to a much older lady who I felt I had nothing in common with, who was just, out to find out what had been going on, I don't think it was approached in a very good manner. It was a very confronting setup, not very child friendly at all. The house parents, the house mother actually got very sick because she knew about all these problems with everyone, and she'd had a very good life. I am still in contact with those people. She'd had a good life, and hearing all these tragedies, and two of the girls that we lived with were sisters, and one of them kept trying to take her own life. So that would have been very difficult. And she was 26 at the time. She was married at 19. She had 3 sons. Only 2 are still living. And she was looking after all of us. She got sick. They had to move on. I went and stayed in a nunnery for a little while. That was actually, when I look back on it, it's really peaceful. It's really good. But it shattered my existence because I had to go from what was comfortable to now having to get on public transport. It was anxiety ridden. I had to catch the tram and then a bus to school, but I chose to catch the tram a long way and then do a short walk instead of catching the tram a little way, catching a bus and getting dropped off out front. So I lived there for a little while and then came back to new cottage parents who were young. They had one daughter, and I think while I was there, she might have gotten pregnant and had another child. I don't quite remember that. I have since seen both of them. The house father was really great to me. The house mother was in too deep, not equipped to deal with somebody like me. And she told me one day, I didn't sign up to have kids as old as you. 13, probably 13. And I was friggin' miserable. So miserable. The highlight of my week was on a Sunday when we went to Barry's parents in a very well-to-do suburb. They were Italian, and the mum would cook us a beautiful Italian meal. Oh my goodness. It's how I learned to slurp spaghetti and eat ossobuco. It was a common thing. That's what we had. And I think Kathy used to talk to his mum about us because I remember feeling uncomfortable about the way she spoke about us. They looked for ways to move me on. There was a girls' home run by a group of nuns in a suburb called Skye. And my social worker, Robin, came and took me to have an interview with them over dinner. But we arrived and the place was like, couldn't really see anyone because they were all praying for their lives probably. Anyway, and we were supposed to sit with people over dinner. We ended up sitting on our own, not eating very much. The meal wasn't very Didn't look too flash. I don't think I enjoyed it. Uh, and on the drive back home, I said to him, I'm not moving there. They had these big dormitories that all the girls were in, uh, and it was separated into sort of little rooms with wardrobes and curtains, so that each girl felt that they had their separate area. That was so much like Morialta in the dormitory style that I said I didn't want to go there. So she presented me with a family that I had previously stayed with on holidays at Morialta, and he had done the same thing to me. It was done in Brighton, and because I'd been abused so much after that, I thought I could fight this bastard off, because the added attraction was there was going to be another girl there. And, maybe he'll get her and not me. Maybe it'll be easier to fight him off with help. And I knew that I couldn't stay where I was, and I had to move on. So I chose the devil I knew and agreed to go and stay with this family, who were my younger brother's foster aunt and uncle. It was a difficult existence again. I didn't run away, but I couldn't settle down. At least I had my foster sister with me. She was equally as miserable as us. I mean, he said to us once, "Are you girls virgins?" And we went, "Yes." We weren't, but you know. And he said, "Well, for your first time, you're going to have to come to me." Now, this is a bloke who'd already had sex with me. What the? It's just gross. And when I look back at it, I wonder, how did his wife not know? I was 13 when I went there, treated just not good. It wasn't good. My foster sister ran away, and the police were involved, and I had to get in the police car and go looking for her. I knew where she was, but I just had them going around in the streets looking for her. I think what they were actually trying to do was get to the bottom of it. I made friends with the people across the road, convinced my social worker that they were a good family, and I moved in with them. She was a primary school teacher, and he ran a brothel in Whitmore Square. Of course, they had another story. And they ended up introducing me to a guy who was much older than me, who showed interest in me, was 14. He probably got quite a bit of money out of that. And I never ever saw him again. But I would say that, he got paid. substantial amount. Anyway, things went downhill there. I think I only stayed there about 7 or 8 months. But what I did was I made friends with the next door neighbours and convinced the social worker to allow me to move in there. Can you believe that? Like, what's going on in this world? So could they not see that this girl who'd already been in multiple families moved across the state and then across the road and then next door? What's going on? So when I moved next door, the man there decided it was good to start a relationship with me because I was 14 and he was engaged to the woman, Carol, poor woman. I was 14. That lasted, I don't know, maybe a year. And I was stealing drugs out of her vanity in her bathroom to cope with how I was feeling. I'd have something in the morning before I left. By recess time, I couldn't keep my eyes open. So I'd go back to the house, sleep. No one was home because everyone was working. Go back to the house and sleep and wake up before anyone got home. Pretend I'd been at school. But of course, there's always a phone call to the people. And because I'd moved a bit, that, nobody knew who to contact at school. And 3/4 of the way through year 11, I was asked to leave. They would give me my leavers certificate, but I needed to leave now. I was causing too much of a disruption. And I think it had to do with the drugs that I had been taking easily. And she used to be a nurse. So I figured if she had them, they couldn't be too bad. Anyway, I rang the social worker and told them that they weren't feeding me properly. I was only having sandwiches for tea, sometimes sandwich for lunch. I can't even remember what we used to eat, but I know that they both worked long hours and get home till late, and I was there a lot of the time on my own. So I was moved out of there. I went to some poor old lady's place in Port Nalunga. That was bad because I was really messed up by then. Anyway, I got shifted from there and went to what I used to call a working girls' hostel in Dulwich. Beautiful, leafy suburb, 5 minutes walk from the city. And I loved it. It was run by an old nun who was a fabulous cook with the patience of a saint. She helped me feel a bit more normal about myself. She also, when I was 17, had to deliver the news that my father had died. Oh, that was bad news. That was very difficult to get over, and one of the other girls was going out with this guy and he had a friend and we were introduced, and so I started going out with him, and I strongly suggested that we get engaged, and so we did. And so at 17, I was told that since I'd made such an important life decision and that I was growing up, it was time to move out. Because if I could be engaged, I could also look after myself at 17. Now, when I moved out with him, And his parents were terrible about it. They were very traumatised by it. Oh, looking back on it, I probably would have been too, but anyway. And that didn't last long. And I moved in with a workmate and his mate, and that didn't last long. And then I got a flat on Marion Road, and I stayed there for quite a few years, I think about 3 years. Felt a very long time back then. So I stayed there till I was 20, and then I got another job, which paid $100 a week extra. And I'd had several boyfriends in between all of that. And I met a guy who was moving to Melbourne. So I moved to Melbourne with this guy, quit my job. And that was the start of me learning who I am, how come I am, and where I wanted to go. I was baptised a Lutheran. My mother sought out a home for us to go into, which was the Moriata Protestant Children's Home. We then went back to my sister and I went back to our dad's, that's Lutheran. We were kidnapped in the middle of the night, and that's how it was for me. That's my story. That's how it was. We were kidnapped in the middle of the night to a Catholic family. Oh, actually, Baptist or whatever it was. Whatever. Who then shuffled me off to a Catholic family. Who then shuffled me off. Well, I then went into a Catholic home because I think I went into the Catholic system because nobody wanted me. There was no place for me in the Lutheran system or the Baptist system or the Protestant system. I think that I was lost in the Department of Community Welfare. So by the time I was 21, I had 22 different addresses, lots of families, lots of hurt, lots of heartache, lots of abuse by the system and by the family. Moving to Melbourne meant that I wasn't faced with daily triggers. And that I could relax a little bit. However, the boyfriend I moved with turned out to be a little bit violent. So that ended. And I moved into a flat on my own in Kemp Street at Thornbury, and I lived there for 6 years, I think, 7 years. I met my son's father and got pregnant and moved back home and parented poorly for a while until I met my now husband and became a family with him in 2002. There was all these kids. I have to say it was fairly traumatic. In the beginning, it was week about, and it was the eldest boy who was 6, and then 9 months and 3 weeks, and my son who was 5, and then 9 months and 1 week, and my stepdaughter, and then 18 months and my youngest stepson. So it was savage. It was savage. It was like them all being twins or something. So it was full on because they were great kids, beautiful kids, beautiful, beautiful kids. I'm so lucky that they came into my life. Life was difficult and hard, but I did my absolute 110% best. We in and out of court for over 10 years, and she had tried to sue me personally. That was another soul destroying thing to have to go through. It was difficult on her. I believe that she had some kind of a breakdown and ended up leaving the children at school and giving us permission to go and get them. So on August the 19th one year, we went and collected them from school. I woke up with one child and went to bed with four. We did little athletics, basketball, soccer, football, eventually cricket, which I didn't like doing. It was a busy life. We did taekwondo on a Tuesday night. We did tap and jazz. And I loved the school holidays because it meant that I didn't actually have to get up so early. And we would travel from south to north to the playgrounds all around the state. And we would go shopping and buy food and stuff. I don't know. That the children weren't spoiled with getting gifts and lollies and that sort of thing. But I tried to spoil them with experience so that it was a very rich experience. I'm not sure there were any benefits to parenting stepchildren whilst I was doing it. Now, benefits are that I have these extra 3 people in my life. One of them is extremely resentful toward me, and I don't blame that particular child. The other 2 are reserved with their affection towards me, as is my son, who now lives in Western Australia for work. The challenges were health issues with the children and then myself. Other challenges were the children would be a little awkward when they first came on a weekend because it shifted from having them week about to having them once a fortnight, which was a killer on my husband. He was absolutely shattered by that. They would come and feel awkward. They would settle down and then go back, and then the whole cycle happened again the next time. But when they came to live with us, I think they realised that when they weren't collected until 6 o'clock at night, that this was their fate. So we travelled from where we lived, 40-minute journey. It was roughly a 40-minute journey, 30-minute journey every morning and every night to take them to the school that they were currently in, so as not to disrupt their actual year. their school year. And the following year, they moved to the school where my son went, and it was fabulous. I walked with them a few times to school, but they walked all together to school, which was really good because it was such a short journey. And when it was raining, I picked them up. Actually, I don't think I let them walk on their own, not straight up. I think I used to walk them all the way to school and walk back, and then I drove them, and then they walked once. I don't know when that was. I don't know when it was that I let it go that they could walk together, but it was. I don't know. I can't remember. But they loved it. In the mornings, in the afternoons, it was Steve's job because he was a milky, so he was gone 4 o'clock in the morning. So I did the morning shift, and he did a lot of the afternoon stuff. I still cooked. We did kind of take it in turns cooking. He did zero cleaning, and he did all the baths. I know how it was for me. You know, I didn't want the children to want for much. When you are dirt poor and you eat other people's scraps and you only have second-hand clothes, you don't let that happen to your children. You just don't. We weren't poor, so they could have good clothes, Clark shoes, Clark school shoes. He used to go to Myers every year, get them fitted out in the Clark school shoes, which was good because they were hard wearing, and they didn't mind. It was extremely taxing on my health, and that shows, well, actually, it's not the only thing that was taxing on my health. You know, my whole childhood was taxing on my health, but it's taxing mainly on my mental health because I had this ongoing damn argument in my head about how bad it was for me, how bad my childhood was. And I'm not saying I was whinging to anyone about, oh, woe is me, I had a really bad time, because I never talked about it to anybody. I learnt very early on in high school that you've got to be very careful about what you say because you can get teased for it pretty quick smart and very badly. I kept thinking back to how my childhood was and how bad it had been for me, and I wasn't going to allow that to happen to these children. I wanted them to, above everything else, feel loved. They had to feel loved. So I made it my mission to make them feel loved. In no way did I want them ever to feel lacking. One of my children said to me, I hate you. And I said, that's okay, mate. I love you enough for the both of us. It was a very difficult thing to hear because I didn't only hear it once, I heard it a bit. And that gets into your core, and I already had begun once again to feel unworthy. I felt loved by my husband, but once all the drama happened with the kids, that kind of takes a back seat. So I think the eldest one was 10 when they came to live with us full time. And they had 18 months, or they had 9 months of zero contact with their mum, and then 9 months of only phone contact. And then after that, they resumed visitation. And that wasn't something that we stopped. Hooking up with a ready-made family is not for the faint of heart. It is not for anybody who is not partially committed. You cannot take on somebody else's child or children without being committed and have a lot of resolve to stick to the plan, because it's very difficult. There's a lot of things going on. You know, you have to take the kids to see counsellors, doctors, end up in hospital over fake stomach aches, you know, or broken legs and, you know, head injuries and terrible sicknesses. Actually, when the children were sick, they had to stay in bed for the day if they were sick. They weren't allowed to get up and watch TV because they had to rest because they were sick. That was my point of view on it. Consequently, the kids were never sick. And when they were sick, they were actually really sick and really did need to stay in bed or on the couch. We have a whole basketball family. Steve retired 6 months ago from coaching. So we're life members of the club. We still remain somewhat involved. We're friends with most of the committee members. And we're probably going to have our grandkids playing basketball soon. It's been incredibly rewarding to take on such a huge voluntary role to run a club with 140 odd people, 13 teams, 14 teams at times. And I don't think I did vice president. I did secretary role for a term. I did the treasury role for a term or 2 terms maybe. But when I took on uniforms, I did that for nearly 7 years, 6 or 7 years, and that was really good. Doing the uniforms means that you get to meet every single member of the club and 1 or 2 of their parents, including their siblings, and, you know, always try to foster a relationship with them, which, you know, those fake it till you make it skills really came in handy, I can tell you that right now. Yeah, so that has been a big part of all of our lives. But I think one of the big revelations several years ago was we were sitting around the committee table one Sunday morning waiting for a game, or a game had just started, and this bloke walks in and he knew who I was, and he said, "Oh, you don't remember me, do you?" He says, "My name's blah, blah." I said, "Oh, my goodness." And he said, "I'm here to sign his child up for basketball." I could not believe it. I could not believe it. So that was like a full round. That was really big, really made me feel old. However, after that, there were more people coming through bringing their kids. And it has been an absolute joy to do that. When Steve and I got together, he knew about my debt collection background, and how good I was. And he needed help in the office. And so I did collect debts for him. I also, for quite a few years, ran his office, his home office. And as things got busier with the children and my health declined, that became increasingly difficult to keep up with. It was a very challenging role being a stepmother and a co-owner of a business, having all this responsibility but not drawing a wage, having no funds, even though I had access to money, it wasn't for lavish things like pedicures and facials and treating myself so I felt like that I was worthy. It was just something that was done because it was an unspoken assignment. Married into a family who had a business, and it was my duty to pick up the slack, I guess. So I had quite a bit of office experience, knew my way around a computer, fax, a telex, I didn't have one, uh, taking orders and placing orders, and it was an extremely busy position that I assumed. Wife of a milky, 4 children at home. I was a stay-at-home mum, but man, was I busy. This stay-at-home mum racket, it's not easy. Yeah, not easy at all. And then the property that we live on was quite large. It's over half an acre. Oh no, yeah, roughly half acre. And a lot of the gardening was up to me to do. So I did that as well. Would have been good to have a new ride-on lawnmower, but I did it by hand. I got it down to, I think, 2 hours. Um, yeah, it was pretty big. Everybody had jobs. We had chickens for a while. We've had dogs, and you know, it's a hard job as well. Uh, anyway, Steve pared down his business, and he ended up doing all the office work for the new business, but that was 12 years ago that happened. So I haven't really done a whole lot of office work for 12 years. Just been trying to manage my health for the last 12 years. So it was a good experience doing his debt collections. I made some wonderful friendships, uh, met some difficult people, some nice people. That's the nature of collecting debts. So I had my appointment with Ted in Flinders Street, and I was ushered in. He explained the process. We talked. I gave him details but I didn't give him very clear details. I told him, and he knew from what I'd said to him that I'd been raped, but, putting his dick there is not kind of how you explain things when you want to explain things in detail. Anyway, he appeared shaken after listening to my story. Now, whether it was just that day, what, I don't know. I don't know. But he asked my permission to send the transcript to the police pedophile task force. And for me, that was a mistake, because once I got there, I was assigned an officer, and we chatted prior, and then I came in, and she said I had to choose one to prosecute. And I was like, what do you mean? Choose one. Are we gonna kill them all, put them all in jail, or do something? Aren't they going to be in trouble now? All these years, brought up all this stuff. You want me to talk about it? And I have to choose one? All right. So I chose the family in Brighton because that one had the most impact. Sorry, not the most impact. That one had the most continuing impact on my life, my entire life, purely because of how often it happened, what he did, and how he got off scot-free. Oh, I was made to look like. So I started talking about it with the woman, and we were doing all these questions, and the seats are not comfortable in those interview rooms. I don't care what anyone says; that was uncomfortable. And I hadn't taken a drink with me. I had no snacks or anything. Rock up in this interview room. We're sitting. It's slightly dark. It was an interior room, so there were no windows. The door was locked once we'd got in there. At one point, I needed to go to the toilet, and she followed me to the toilet and stayed outside the door, because that must have been the protocol. What was I going to do? Hang myself? After coming all this way? I don't know. I was just. Anyway, went back to doing the interview, and she had to leave the room, and I was locked in. And when she left the room, I broke down. I couldn't stop crying. I could hardly catch my breath. I don't know what happened, but I turned into a crying wreck. And when she came back, she refused to continue with the interview, saying that she didn't feel that she would be able to get an accurate story out of me. And I kind of understand that now, but I didn't for a very long time. I was just fucking angry. I was angry. Angry enough to write to her and tell her that she should have given me just, a bit of time to compose myself and then continue with the story. Not have to come back in and dredge all that shit up. And I don't actually even remember finishing the interview. I did have follow-up from her for a little while. She must have moved on, and some other bloke took it over. And I got, I think, 2 phone calls in 4 years from him, or 3 years, and they rang me and said that they were going out to interview him. And I was like, oh, yes. it was good. Someone was going to have to answer for what they did to me. And then they got back to me afterwards, and he said to me, at no, and also at no stage did I feel not believed by this guy. Probably because the girl was questioning me or giving me the questions. I think she didn't. I had an intense belief that she just didn't believe my statement at all. You know. Anyway, and so the bloke said that they had interviewed him, and that they don't believe that he'd had any more, that family had had any more children go to them. They couldn't find any evidence of that. They couldn't find any evidence of him possibly molesting anybody else. So it was an opportunistic crime, wasn't it, really? You know, becomes this little play toy stuffed in your lap. There you go, thank you very much. And so they weren't going to proceed with it because there wasn't enough evidence. That's right, because I was on telly too. They'd taken me to Muffy's Mouthful, some Channel 7 thing show that was on, and they couldn't find records of me actually being on the show. 2 years after he was questioned, he died of a heart attack. And I found that out because they rang me and said that he had died and that nothing, it wasn't going anywhere, nothing was going to happen. I was so glad that this man had died, but so shattered at the same time because nobody was going to be held accountable for what had happened. Nobody's responsible. What, so it's my responsibility? I'm the one who's to blame, or is at fault for these men wanting to rape me? Sometime after that, my case was picked up again and they moved on to the next bloke. Both had the same name too, by the way. Because so many years had passed, this bloke was already in a freaking home because he had some Parkinson's something or other. And by the time they got to question him, he couldn't speak. He was non-verbal. And the guy who rang me about that, I knew he believed me. I knew it 100%. I knew that he believed me. And he actually seemed upset that this guy, they couldn't do anything because of the condition of this bloke. He ended up dying. Don't know when, but I'm glad he did. Filthy bloke. I felt so offended about that class action because I had heard of some people getting $5,000 and $7,000, and I did not want to be a part of something that was going to basically kick sand in my face, because $5,000 for a lifetime of hurt and pain and suffering, it's not worth the trouble. And it's every time I have to talk about it, it takes takes a lot to recover from talking about it. When I leave it for a while and don't talk about it, kind of pretend that everything's okay. And it's only when something happens that the top off the soda bottle comes off and everything fizzes out, all the hurt. And so that's why I still pursue seeing a psychologist and having sessions. Because it seems that I'm always looking for tools on how to deal with stuff. Because the tools become blunt. And it feels like the older I get, the blunter the tools. It happens a lot quicker. I tried hypnotherapy once. I tried it with this guy who ended up poking me in the middle of a session. That was it. I couldn't go back to him again after that. I don't know why he thought that was a good idea. Who's going to pay? What amount are they going to pay? Are they going to pay my psychology bills for the rest of my life? I don't think so. I'm just another bit of dirt on the bottom of their shoe. Something they have to scrape off and get rid of or hide under the mat. Nobody really cares about in the government. Nobody is that bothered by the hurt and the damage, by the atrocities that was committed against me, enough to make me feel like somebody really was sorry and somebody really wants to try and help me be a whole person. But that's up to me, which is, probably up to me anyway. I have stages in my life where I am kicking goals. I feel good, but the wheels come off and I become an extreme wreck, sometimes for long periods of time. A couple of years ago, I spent 9 months on the couch downstairs. It was about 5 years ago. I got two crushing diagnosis from the doctor and specialist, and I just wanted to not exist anymore. I wanted to not be here. I wanted to end the suffering. I wanted to end the hurt. But the only one, I think, in the end, who really can do that is me. I'm the one in charge. I am just a bit of dirt on the bottom of the government shoe. That's it, you know. I'd like them to take responsibility for the way they didn't take charge of who was caring for me. When your parents give up the right to you, nobody actually assumes the role of caring for you. They just deal with you, shuffle you from here to there. And if you fit in one place and you stay there for a while, well, that's good. I think I have two people in. I am firstly a broken child. I am mainly hurt, feel let down, feel totally let down by this fucking ridiculous government that's still allowing children in care to be abused. What is going on? 58 years old, it was happening, well, when I was 5. Why is it still happening? And secondly, the second person in me is a happy, confident, fake it till you make it kind of gal. I have a couple of interests, and sometimes I have it in me to do this all the time. I recently received a ukulele. I want to try and play the ukulele because I love singing. I always have, and I want to learn the ukulele, and I want to play and sing to myself. I think music is very healing, and I'm still having therapy, trying to heal that little girl. I think that's going to be a job for the rest of my life. It's not an easy job. I guess if it was an easy job, things would be a whole lot different. I don't actually feel like I'm ever going to get over it. Not because I don't want to. I desperately want to be over it. I wish this was a good story. I wish this was a wonderful story, but it's not. Because when something bad happens with the kids, it brings up the pain of when I was a child. And that's not to say that I haven't dealt with it. It's just that that's what happens because that's been the cycle that I have lived with. So I'm seeing a psychologist with an interest in neurology, and she's been really good. Had a break over COVID uh, from seeing her because I'm basically stayed home for 3 years. I set my mind to do something. It's like I have this internal wall that I switch over, and I'm dedicated. This is what I said I would do. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it to 110%. You're going to be happy with it. I'm going to feel good because I saw it through. Might be hard. That's what happens. It was a bit easier when I was younger to fake it till I make it. This putting on a happy face and pretending to be happy when inside I feel like I'm dying. It's a lot harder to do now that I'm older. And I don't know why. It should be easy. I've had a lot more experience with it. Why can't I just, switch that bloody thing again and get into it. Yes, I understand it's not the current government that were responsible for the atrocities that were committed against me, but the current government are responsible for the atrocities happening to the children now that are in care. You know, that's not good enough.